Now, if we are the shadows, if each three-dimensional body is a shadow of a four-dimensional entity, now what would this four-dimensional entity be? How can I even imagine it? Because I am a shadow. How can a shadow understand what light is? It can at the most understand something about what is creating this shadow. The object that is blocking let's say there's light and there is a three-dimensional body blocking that light. This casts a two-dimensional shadow. Now, this two-dimensional shadow can at the most, using mathematical concepts, a little bit of abstraction, can get a sense of what is this thing that is blocking it, because there is some boundary similarity. Of course, shadow cannot capture the entirety of the three-dimensional body, but it can capture some aspects of it. So if you tried hard, you will see some connection between this three-dimensional body in a higher dimension and your body. Some similarity. But it is impossible for you to comprehend light. The nature of light is so different from you. It completely skips your mind. You cannot imagine the fourth dimension. So fourth dimension is not an additional spatial dimension. It is not a tesseract. It is not a hypercube. It is an altogether different realm. Now, if we truly understand what the fourth dimension is, we will understand what consciousness is. The shift that we need to make is to shift from thinking in terms of space and time, because that is our flat land. Now, if we are moving to a three-dimensional world, we should completely drop this idea of a flat land, because in three dimensions, flat land doesn't exist. It is just a concept. You are in a completely different reality. Similarly, when we move from three dimension to fourth dimension, our world of space and time doesn't exist. It is an altogether different entity. Because imagination itself is a restricted process of abstracting our three dimension. Imagination is a limited phenomenon that can only happen inside the third dimension. So how can you imagine the fourth dimension? You cannot imagine it. It requires a completely different way of understanding this. Now, this is where I believe we have been stuck. Because we have not made this jump. We have not truly understood what the fourth dimension is, because we are so conditioned and tuned to see and think and move in spaces. We simply could not comprehend. We have not even tried to understand this fourth dimension in its entirety. Now, if fourth dimension is a reality, and our three-dimensional world is just a shadow of this fourth dimensional world, then without understanding this fourth dimension, we are just stuck in abstract theories explaining one thing in terms of another. Still useful explanations. It will help us to understand our dimension. It will help us to understand what's happening relative to things. Now, that is what our science is. That is what physics is. It's using mathematics, using theories, using concepts to explain the world of perception. Our three-dimensional world is a perceptual dimension because we are perceiving it. If there is a higher dimension, then if this is all a shadow, why does it feel real? Because It is our perceptual dimension, it feels real. But nothing will be real here. Every single thing that you are seeing and experiencing will have an extension in a higher dimension. Its true meaning, its true purpose, its true identity will be in the higher dimension. What you are seeing and experiencing will only be a shadow, a small cross section of that totality. And yet, we will have concepts explaining things. Okay, just imagine this fourth dimension exists. Now, if it exists, it has to exist everywhere, at all times, because it exists beyond the limitation of space and time. And it should be absolutely impossible for us to perceive this fourth dimension using our three-dimensional bodies, because we can only perceive things in our dimension. In fact, if you truly understand dimensional mathematics, you will see a creature of a particular dimension can only perceive in one dimension lower. A flower drawing on a sheet of paper cannot perceive in two dimensions. It sees in one dimension. A one-dimensional line cannot perceive in one dimension. It can only perceive in zero dimension. There won't be any perception at all for a one-dimensional line. Similarly, three-dimensional bodies, strictly mathematically speaking, should be perceiving the world in two dimensions. We should only be perceiving the world in flat, abstract, emerging and disappearing surfaces, colorful surfaces. There is no reason why we should be perceiving ourselves in three dimensions. Now, that itself says there is one component to our reality, there is one aspect to our being that does not belong to three dimensions. It is a higher dimension. That is why we are able to perceive ourselves as three-dimensional beings. We'll get to consciousness. Once we truly understand what consciousness is, we will conclude that it is next to impossible for consciousness to be generated inside a three-dimensional body. We have altogether misunderstood the basic idea of what consciousness is. What does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to be conscious? It is because for us, consciousness is a subjective experience. It is an experience that we are having. And it's so close that we don't even know if we are having an experience of consciousness or is consciousness having an experience of us. That is how intermixed our understanding of consciousness and life are. But when we truly understand what a higher dimension is, why it is impossible to perceive yourself as a creature in your dimension, what is the absolute perceptual limitation? See, to be able to have a sense of my three-dimensional body, I cannot be stuck inside the body. If I'm stuck inside the body, then I'm using my senses to perceive my three-dimensional world. How can I perceive things in three dimensions? It's like saying a flower on a sheet of paper can somehow step out of that flat surface, go up and look at itself. Somehow, we are generating consciousness in the body, it is being generated in the brain. Somehow, this entity is able to come outside and have a perception that is top down. We know consciousness is a top-down perception. It is not a bottom-up perception. Again, we confuse perception with senses. So you can still argue, well, I don't see myself from the top. You don't see yourself from the top. That is a visual dimension. But you do perceive yourself as a three-dimensional body moving around in a three-dimensional world. And when you look at another person, you don't look at a flat surface. You look at a three-dimensional body. Now, how do we explain this? We explain it in terms of brain. Oh, the brain is doing it. The brain is such a wonderful organ. Now think about it, a brain that is sitting inside the body, which has no direct access to the world. It doesn't even know where it is. It is in a dark place. It does not even perceive light. It operates in signals, electrical signals, neural signals, and it is processing information that is coming from the keyholes of the body, eyes, nose, ears. And to see and to say that this brain that is in this dark place is able to give this perception of our three-dimensional world in light, in its entirety, in its complexity, there is something fundamentally wrong in the way we are looking at things. Now, of course, without understanding the higher dimension, there is no way for us to solve this problem. That is why the problem of consciousness has been the hardest problem. It is one of the oldest problems and the most difficult of problems to solve. Even up till now, we have simply regarded consciousness as a hard problem. I don't know if we can ever solve it. Now, if we cannot solve consciousness, if we cannot understand consciousness, then we cannot understand the nature of reality. We cannot understand our world because consciousness precedes everything. To be alive, you need to be conscious. To perceive your body, you need to be conscious. To move, you need to be conscious. To make decisions, you need to be conscious. I mean, we know what happens when we are not conscious. When you fall asleep, when you cannot be conscious of your body, you cannot even use your body. You don't even have a perception of your body. Yeah, your body is there lying on the bed, but you are completely disconnected from it. You are somewhere else. Now, that is how primary consciousness is. If you see a creature moving, you have to assume that it is conscious. Movement is impossible without consciousness. Of course, one thing can be pushed by another. Things move by themselves, but anything that you can recognize as this is moving on its own, even a plant. Yes, it is not moving on the horizontal plane, but it is moving. Come back and look at it after a while, it would have moved up. That growth in the upward direction is its movement. Now the question is, how is it moving? What is governing its movements? What is instructing it to move in this particular way? And what is keeping it aligned to that kind of movement? Certainly, it cannot be an external entity. Nothing is pushing it from outside. It is idiotic to assume that there is another living creature sitting inside this plant and pushing it upwards. So this plant is alive. That is why it is moving in the most simplistic sense. Now, if it is alive and if it is moving, it has to be conscious. Because without consciousness, there is no way for it to know that it is. If it does not know that it is, how can it move? How can it orient itself to get as much sunlight as possible? Plants make decisions. We know this. All plants do. But in some plants, we can see this in real time. For example, the Mimosa pudica, the touch me not plant. It responds to touch. It responds to stimulus of touch. You just touch the leaves, it curls up. Now, how do you explain this? Certainly, this plant has no nervous system, no brain, no neural activity, all the things that we see as prerequisites for consciousness. And yet, this plant is responding. We cannot say it is just happening. Now, that is not science. When we look at it purely scientifically, we can see that there is a stimulus and there is a response. Very simple. And this response is not being induced from outside somewhere. This creature is responding from inside, which means on the inside, somewhere we cannot see, this inside might even be a different dimension, somewhere it has a sense of the world it is in. It has a deeper understanding of the place it is occupying and what is happening around it. Without eyes, without nose, without sensory apparatus, without the brain, it is still able to respond. And there are innumerable examples. You can see this at every level in the animal kingdom, in the plant kingdom, where response, solving problems, ability to understand complex decision-making process, searching for food, searching for a mate, protecting oneself from harm. All these things are happening without a brain. In some cases, not even anything resembling a central nervous system. We have to radically rethink our understanding of consciousness. We cannot be this blind to a phenomenon that is so universal. To say that human body, human beings are generating consciousness, they are conscious because there is complex thought process, there is a complex structure called the brain, is a complete contradiction. Because consciousness, as it appears, doesn't seem to be a complex mechanism. It seems to be so simple, so basic, that it is a part of every living expression of life. In fact, it is consciousness that is expressing itself as a creature, as something. It is not the other way around. What if our bodies are being generated in consciousness and not the other way around? Then we have to understand this consciousness as an objective, verifiable, mathematically provable, scientific phenomenon. It cannot simply be left to, we don't know. It's a hard problem. We cannot solve it. It's got to be solved. Perhaps that is the only problem that is needing to be solved. If we solve the problem of consciousness, then we'll know why we are here. We'll know where we have come from. We'll know why we do what we do. Once we understand that, we will know our world, because we know our world is in perfect sync with who we are. It is because we walk, there is space, there is earth on which to stand. Our perceptual world around us is an extension of all the things our bodies can do. It is the degree of freedom that is offered to the body. So the environment and the body are totally interlinked. If we understand ourselves, we will understand our nature of reality. But to understand ourselves, we need to know something that is fundamental, that is universal, that is governing all our actions, all our thought processes, and it is not just ours. It belongs to every other creature of existence, perhaps even to things you don't regard as alive. When you truly understand consciousness, you will see it can animate things in ways that you cannot even comprehend.